Hello, BookTube. Another little genie has escaped from the bottle here in our little corner of BookTube. I think that's wonderful. I love it when it happens. I always love especially that it's a completely organic function. No one plans it ahead of time. It started with a discussion video on Eric Carl Anderson's channel where he talked about top 5 English novels. And that sparked a whole bunch of people to do their own lists of top 5 English novels. Shelley Swearingen made a tag out of it. And that prompted Matthew at Mayberry Book Club to do that and to, in the process, realize that he's not all that fired up by English novels, which made him make an un-English novel top 5. And that eventually propagated to Michael K. Vaughan's channel, where he did a video, I think just today, on his top 5 novels in translation. And Matthew did a video along the same lines with weird special effects. He starts the video and then you hear something that sounds like construction trucks approaching, and you wonder if maybe his tiny house is going to be run over, but then you realize it sounds a lot more like a bison herd approaching, and you think, all right, does he live in the Great West? Is he near a bison herd? And then you see the cause, which is he has 2 55-pound cats that live in the tiny house with him, or rather he lives in it with them, and they glumphed across the screen. But he did a video on his top 5 novels in translation. I want to join in on some of these iterations, so I want to talk today about my top 5 novels in translation. And that got me thinking right away of one of my favorite subjects, which is the art of translation itself. And what we mean by that. What are the criteria for what qualifies to be on this list of your top 5 novels in translation? And it came down to 2 possibilities for me. Either I am talking about the art of translation, so I am parsing participles and gerunds and infinitives, and I'm saying these are the top 5 works of art of the translator's art itself. Or I'm just talking about reading experiences, and I thought, okay, the second one is closer to a top 5 in sentiment. I want to be talking about reading experiences, and once I thought that, I realized, well, okay, then my list has to be governed by the top 5 novels in translation that I have never read except in translation. 5 novels that I only know through translation, so that I'm not talking about participles or gerunds or whatnot, so that I'm not saying, okay, well, I have read this novel and I've also read these translations, and now I will compare the translations for my top 5 translations. You see what I mean? I'm not so much talking about that as I am talking about works that I only know through translation. So there's no way for me to compare what so-and-so does with what so-and-so does, except by their effectiveness in English, if any of that makes any sense. So I picked 5 novels, my top 5 novels in translation along those lines. And the first one is a big, relatively new thing. It's a Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition. It's Kristin Lavransdatter by Sigrid Undset. And this is the translation by Tina Nonnelly of the 3 volumes of Kristin Lavransdatter. It's an epic historical novel cycle all about the title character. And it hooks you right from the first page. And I have no idea, as is true with everything else on this list, I have no idea what it's like to read this without a translator. I no ability to read this thing, so I am entirely in the translator's hands. I read this first with an earlier translator. I don't remember the name of that translator. And then I read it again when Penguin came out with this deluxe edition and liked this translation a lot more. So I don't know, what that says to the original. I thought this was a better, smoother reading experience. Then we have another book. This is another book. I've read this many, many times. I read it a very long time ago. This is The Egyptian by Mika Waltari, about Sinuhe, about an Egyptian, in the Middle Kingdom, and his life and time. So the author was able to distill a huge amount of research into an epic novel, and it's sold like the dickens and eventually made its way into English in a translation. I think this has been translated a couple of times, but I read a translation a long time ago, a long time, the one that was still out and around in paperback in the 50s and early 60s. I think this has been translated since then. I really would like it if someone would come along and do brand new translations of all of the historical fiction by this author, the Egyptian, the Roman, the Etruscan. They're all fantastic books. Give them a brand new translation with new introductions, notes, and all that. That would be wonderful. But this was an entire reading sensation. Caused a little sensation on its own, sparked a ton of knockoff novels by other people, sparked a whole interest in ancient Egyptology in the fiction world for decades. And so I'm due for a reread, but I have never experienced this other than in a translator's hands. Same thing with this next one, which is a tiny little thing. It's a slim thing. And it's so raw and affecting that I honestly do feel like I've read this in the original, which is a real tribute to the translator, in this case, Paul Wilson. This is I Serve the King of England by Vaughan, which is it's a slim novel. It's a picaresque novel about the miscellaneous adventures of a young character, and ends on some pretty horrible, dark notes. This is a take no prisoners little thing. That really sits with you. I mean, all of this author's novels do, in my opinion. But they are so immediate and they are so raw that when you're finished with them, it really is only the third or fourth or fifth thing that you think to remember that you did not read the author's words. You read the translator. It's still weird for me to think. So when I was putting together my thoughts for this little list, Robble did not come to mind for a long time until I remembered, oh, wait, you've never read a single word this author wrote. And then my last two are biggies. The first one being War and Peace. This is the Peviar and Volkonsky translation in a trade paperback. And I have read every English language translation of this book, starting from way back when with the mods and Constance Garnett and Rosemary Edmonds. And I have a lot to say about all of them. Naturally, when you read that many translations of anything, I've done that with all the Russians. If you're me, I start to notice the differences in what the translations themselves are doing to a very wonkish degree. I have done that I've spent a lot of time thinking about the minutiae of what the English translations themselves are doing. So I've got you down to one 3-paragraph exchange in one scene of one chapter, and I've got 6 translations spread out in front of me. Now, I might not be able to read the original, but I can definitely echolocate the original. I can tell what's going on here by the choices the translators are making. And I love doing that. Absolutely love doing that. If I review a new translation and an editor will give me any kind of room, I will do that for 1,000 words, 2,000 words. All without the original. All just doing that. Just trying to create an EKG of the original from what the different translators are doing. It's tremendous fun. But doing that over and over again over the years can obscure the fact that I have never read this author. I have only read translations, which feels really weird because, I like Turgenev, I like Chekhov, I love a good deal of Dostoevsky, and I love a lot of Lermontov, but Tolstoy? That's pretty much a different level for Tolstoy, and yet I have engaged with this author through translators into only one language, which is amazing to me. This is the Peviar and Volkonsky translation that I'm holding up, and I don't find it successful. Not anywhere near as successful as older and more conservative translations. This is it's not conservative. It's wild. It's meant to capture some of the wild genius of Tolstoy. I think it captures maybe a little bit more of that than is actually on the page, but I don't know. I don't know one way or another. It's a disjointed reading experience in a way that I think an effective translation of War and Peace is not. But I could be wrong. It could be that the original is closer to this than anything else. And then the final of my top 5 novels in translation is the first of them all. It's Tale of Genji. This is the Danish Washburn translation of Murasaki Shikibu's 1,000-year-old novel, The Tale of Genji, which I have read. It was done in, it was done in 4 unabridged English language translations. Arthur Whaley did it, then Arthur Seidensticker did it, and then Royal Tyler did it, and finally Dennis Washburn did it. And I love this novel. I absolutely love it. I know that's not PC in the 21st century, but I don't care. I love this novel, and I've read all of those translations, and once again, I have parsed single scenes of single chapters with all the translations spread in front of me, analyzing the choices that they make. What is actually going on here based on the choices that you make? It's fairly easy to do in the case of Genji because Arthur Whaley, the English language translation that he did 100 years ago, very much takes liberties with the text. Not in an irresponsible way. Whaley wanted to make a coherent story and thought that the more weird eccentricities on Murasaki Shikibu's part he could eliminate, the more coherent the story would be. There are quite a few of those eccentricities, quite a few. Not least of which, as any of you have ever attempted this novel, maybe you've attempted later translations. One of those eccentricities is a fairly big one in a novel this big, which is that Murasaki Shikibu is not always naming her characters. In fact, she seldom does. She often refers to them by allusions, or by the name of their parents, or by their office at court. And always when she does that, the way she is referring to the character has an ironic, very delicate point to it. Why, for instance, in this particular chapter, are you referring to this character by their title when in another chapter you refer to them by the name of their foremost wife? Well, it's because in the chapter where you're referring to them by the title, you're making an ironic point about the importance of titles in that chapter. Whereas in the chapter where you're referring to them by their foremost wife, that chapter has to do with maybe one of Genji's infidelities, maybe the identity of some other person's wife. It's all incredibly implicated into the narrative, but it doesn't fit with Western storytelling at all. In Western storytelling, the storyteller tends to identify more explicitly who they're talking about. The extremely subtle, studied folding and refolding of the narrative doesn't usually happen to that extent in Western fiction. And when you're a translator of Genji, you have to figure out what to do about that. No translator wants to do violence to the original. Whaley didn't want to do violence to the original. But you have to figure out what to do with that, because one of your jobs as a translator is to make something that will be comprehensible to your reading audience. You can't just, obviously, right? I mean, if you were to translate even Homer completely literally, large chunks of it would go right by even the most attentive English reader. Instead, you've got to do something with it. I find that sort of thing absolutely fascinating. And over the course of making those kind of intertextual comparisons, I have occasionally over time lost track of the fact that I have not read this author. I have only read translations. And the fact that those translations differ so much one from the other, it indicates to me what a wild experience I might have in store if I ever did read this author without any translator in the room. Wow, what an amazing experience that would probably be. In all of these cases, I don't think it will ever happen. But I wanted to single out these books specifically for that reason. Of course, I'm holding up the Penguin, the paperback copy of Tale of Genji, because it's blurbed by yours truly, Open Letters Monthly. So we have a good number of blurbs on this, but also me. That's great. That was a joy. But those are 5 novels in translation. Top 5 novels in translation. The type of thing where I have had some of these things as dear, treasured companions for so long, and yet I have only dealt with them through translators. That is amazing to me. So I thought I'd make that as this list, as opposed to, for instance, mentioning The Hunchback of Notre Dame or 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or The Three Musketeers or something like that. I thought I would do that instead of a novel that I have tracked down and read in the original. So, I'm not saying that these are the best novels in their English translations. I'm saying these are the ones that work for me in the lens of translation. Anyway, I don't know if I made that clear or not, but that's fun. I'll leave a link to Michael's video and to Matthew's video. Fascinating subject. I'd love to hear it from all of you. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.